There is a house on Panther Creek Court in Walburg, North Carolina. A quiet, suburban street, manicured lawns, a neighborhood where nothing ever seems to happen. The kind of street where children ride bikes, where neighbors wave from driveways, where the biggest drama of the week is whether someone forgot to bring in their trash cans. On August the 2nd, 2015, at 3 in the morning, a 911 call shattered that silence forever. The voice on the line was calm, almost unnervingly calm for someone who had just done what this man had done. "My son-in-law got in a fight with my daughter," the caller told the operator. "I intervened and I hit him in the head." The dispatcher asked, "With what?" "A baseball bat." When Davidson County Sheriff's Lieutenant Wanda Thompson arrived at the scene, she walked into the master bedroom of the house and stopped cold. She would later say, "It's one of the bloodiest crime scenes I've seen in a long time." A baseball bat leaned against the furniture. A brick was stained with blood. Hair still stuck to it, and in the middle of that bedroom, on the floor, was Jason Corbett, a 39-year-old Irish businessman, a father of two, a man who had already survived the most devastating loss a person can endure, the death of the woman he loved, and had rebuilt his life piece by piece, only to end up here, on the floor of a house he had paid $390,000 for, in a country he had moved to for love. Beaten beyond recognition in the room where he slept. The pathologist who performed the autopsy would later state that Jason had so many blows to his head that the wounds overlapped and couldn't be counted individually. And during the examination, a chunk of Jason Corbett's skull fell out onto the table. This is the story of a deadly American marriage, and everything you are about to hear is true. To understand how Jason Corbett ended up dead on that bedroom floor, you have to go back to Ireland. Back to a life that, by any measure, was a good one. Jason Corbett originally lived in Limerick, Ireland, with his first wife Margaret, known to everyone as Mags Fitzpatrick. They had 2 children together, a boy named Jack and a girl named Sarah. By all accounts, they were a happy family. Jason was a businessman, well-liked, warm, the kind of man who made friends easily and kept them for life. He and Mags had built something real together. And then, in November 2006, the world collapsed. When Mags died of an asthma attack, Jason was devastated. He would write letters to his late wife and leave them at her gravesite. His sister Tracy later recalled how broken he was. This was a man hollowed out by grief, suddenly alone with a toddler and an infant, trying to figure out how to keep going. Sarah had been born just a few months before Mags died. She was only 18 months old when she lost her mother. Jack was 3. Jason did what he had to do. He went back to work. He raised his children. He leaned on his family. And slowly, painfully, he tried to piece together a life. But he was one man, working full-time, raising 2 babies. He needed help. Real, consistent, daily help. He used an au pair service to find someone to care for the children while he worked. The person who answered that call was a 24-year-old woman from Knoxville, Tennessee. Her name was Molly Martens. Molly Martens came to Limerick, Ireland in 2008. She was hired to care for Jack, then 3 years old, and Sarah, who was just 18 months. Jason was charming and funny. Molly would later say he made her feel very special. Before long, what had started as a professional arrangement became something else entirely. The widower and the au pair fell in love. Or at least, that's what it looked like from the outside. An email from Jason to Molly from that time showed that Jason didn't want to rush the relationship. He didn't want the kids to get hurt if things didn't work out. He was careful, deliberate, a man who had already watched his children lose one woman who mattered to them. He wasn't going to let that happen again, but it kept building. And eventually, Jason and Molly got engaged. They married in the US in 2011, and eventually settled with the kids in North Carolina to start their new life together. They moved into a house at Panther Creek Court in Walburg, North Carolina. Jason paid $390,000 for the house. He also gave Molly $80,000 to furnish it, bought her a BMW SUV, and had previously given his father-in-law Tom Martens $49,000 as a contribution toward the wedding. Jason Corbett was generous, deeply, almost naively generous. He gave everything he had to this new life he was building. But some of those closest to him were starting to notice things that didn't add up, things that made them uneasy. Corbett's family, who had initially approved of Molly becoming romantically involved with Jason, became increasingly concerned about what they described as her deceitful and erratic behavior. His sister Tracy Lynch said Molly had a long history of lying, describing her as a fantasist who claimed to have been an Olympic swimmer, a qualified Montessori teacher, and had made other claims that turned out to be false. There were darker stories too. Family members alleged that Molly once held then 7-year-old Jack's face under a running kitchen faucet as punishment for splashing her with water. There was also an incident where Jack was punished for not calling her Mom, a family friend alleged that Molly became angry for several days when Jack reminded her she was not his mother. Molly allegedly avoided telling neighbors that Jack and Sarah were not her biological children, and became enraged when Jack told their neighbors the truth. And then there was the question of the children's future, a question that would become the fault line everything else cracked along. Although Molly had reportedly wanted to formally adopt Jack and Sarah so they could acquire American citizenship, Jason instead applied for green cards for the children while keeping their Irish passports. John Corbett, Jason's brother, later said the issue around adoption had caused real friction in their relationship. Jason had specifically processed the children's legal status through his job, rather than through the Martens family, due to concerns that the children would not be repatriated to Ireland in the event of his unexpected death. Read that again. Jason was already thinking about what would happen to his children if something happened to him. He was building in safeguards, quietly, carefully. Molly would later allege that by preventing her from adopting the children, Jason ensured she would never divorce him, because she knew she would lose access to them if she left. She claimed this was a form of coercive control, that he was using the children as a trap, but the Corbett family saw it completely differently. They believed Jason was protecting his children from a woman he had begun to fear. And here is where the two stories, the two completely irreconcilable versions of this marriage, begin to diverge like roads at a crossroads. One story leads to a controlling, violent man. The other leads to something far more calculated and cold. Behind the walls of that house on Panther Creek Court, the marriage was crumbling. Molly said Jason had become possessive and jealous, always questioning her about where she was going and who she'd be seeing. She said she was so afraid of him, so convinced that he would use the children against her in any divorce proceeding, that she began placing hidden recording devices around the house, building a case, she claimed, in the event she ever needed to prove he was abusive. She alleged that sometimes his anger would lead to a violent situation. Those recordings would eventually become one of the most contested pieces of evidence in the entire case, because what you hear on them depends entirely on which side of the aisle you're sitting on. The defense heard an abusive man, the prosecution heard a woman trying to manufacture evidence. Meanwhile, Molly was quietly talking to lawyers. Court records later revealed that in the summer of 2013, Martens had sought legal advice on her custody rights regarding the children in the event of a divorce. She spoke with another lawyer in late 2014 about her rights to the children. The summer of 2013, a year and a half after the wedding, she was already consulting attorneys about the children before most marriages have even had their first serious crisis. And there was someone else in the picture now, someone who had come to visit, someone whose presence in that house on Panther Creek Court would change everything. Molly's father, Tom Martens. Tom Martens was not an ordinary man. He was a former FBI agent. He had spent his career in federal law enforcement. He knew how to read a crime scene. He knew how investigations worked. He knew, better than almost anyone, exactly what questions would be asked in the aftermath of a violent death. A woman named Joanne Lowry, who had worked with Tom Martens at the United States Department of Energy for several years, later testified that before Jason and Molly's wedding in 2011, Martens had already expressed dislike for Jason, describing his invited friends as rude and rowdy. And in another conversation, just 2 months before Corbett's death, Lowry claimed Martens had said to her, "That son-in-law, I hate him. I hate him." 2 months before Jason Corbett was beaten to death in his own bedroom. On the night of August the 1st into August the 2nd, 2015, Tom Martens was staying at the house on Panther Creek Court. He was there when Jason and Molly went to bed. He was there when the children were asleep in their rooms. According to the account that was later given, Jason and Molly were awakened in the middle of the night when Sarah, then 8 years old, had a bad dream. What happened next in that bedroom is the question that has consumed 2 countries, multiple courtrooms, countless news programs, and now a Netflix documentary. What happened in those early morning hours, in that darkened bedroom, is the question that no one has ever fully answered to everyone's satisfaction, because the only people who truly know are the 2 people who walked out of that room alive. What is not in question are the results. According to the prosecution and the autopsy findings, the pair beat Jason Corbett to death with a brick and a baseball bat, administering at least 12 blows to his head, and crushing his skull. Neither Molly nor her father had a scratch on them. The delicate bracelet on Molly's arm was not broken. The nylon in her pajamas was intact. A man was dead with a crushed skull. And the 2 people who said they had been fighting for their lives didn't have a mark on them. The 911 call came in. The paramedics arrived. They found Molly Martens attempting to carry out CPR on Jason Corbett, who had suffered traumatic injuries. It was too late. Jason Corbett was gone. When law enforcement began piecing together what had happened, they weren't dealing with an ordinary case. The man who had made that 911 call, the man who casually admitted to hitting his son-in-law in the head with a baseball bat, was a former federal agent. He knew exactly how to talk to police. He knew exactly what to say and what not to say. The investigation moved forward. Evidence was collected. Statements were taken. Jason's twin brother Wayne said he believed his brother was asleep when he was attacked. 6 months after the murder, in February 2016, Molly Martens Corbett and her father Thomas Martens were formally charged with second-degree murder. The news exploded on both sides of the Atlantic. In Ireland, Jason Corbett was not just a man. He was a son, a brother, a neighbor, someone from Limerick, who had gone to America and built a life, and been killed in his own bed. The Irish media descended on the story. His family, especially his sister Tracy, became vocal, relentless advocates for justice. Tracy Corbett Lynch would later write a book titled My Brother Jason, the untold story of Jason Corbett's life and brutal murder by Tom and Molly Martens. The title said it all. She believed the two had plotted to murder her brother. She described Molly as a conniving woman who never truly loved Jason and manipulated everyone around her, including the children. And the children, Jack and Sarah, the two people at the absolute center of this story, who had no power in any of it. They had been only 10 and 8 years old when their father was killed. They had already lost their mother before they were old enough to remember her, and now they had lost their father to violence. And they were being pulled in two directions, between the stepmother who had raised them, and the family their father had designated as their guardians. In his will, Jason had named his sister Tracy, and her husband as the children's guardians, not his wife. After his death, the children returned to Ireland, to live with their aunt, who fought hard for justice for her brother. But before they left, something deeply troubling happened. Shortly after Jason's death, Jack and Sarah gave statements to social workers, in which they described witnessing their father abusing Molly. Those statements would become a weapon in the hands of the defense. 9 months later, Jack and Sarah recanted those statements. They said in the documentary that Molly had coached them, telling the children they'd be taken away from her if they didn't lie. A 9-year-old child, coached to lie to protect the woman who had just killed their father. The trial began in August 2017, in Davidson County, North Carolina. It was a spectacle. Journalists from Ireland and the United States packed the courtroom. Jason's family sat on one side. The Martens family sat on the other. The prosecution built a case around cold, hard physical evidence and motive. They argued that Molly Martens had killed her husband because she believed he was going to take the children away from her. Children she had raised but never legally adopted. Children who were legally his and legally destined to return to Ireland if anything went wrong. They pointed to the $600,000 life insurance policy that Jason had taken out. Prosecutors argued that Molly and Tom had concocted a story of self-defense to cover a crime that sprang from malice. The defense painted a completely different picture. They said Jason Corbett was an abusive, controlling man who had terrorized his wife for years. They said Tom Martens was a father who heard his daughter screaming in the night and did what any father would do. They said the two of them had barely escaped with their lives. Tom Martens testified that he had acted in self-defense, claiming that Jason was choking his daughter, and that he reacted to what he believed was a mortal threat to her life. RTE. But the prosecution hammered the physical evidence. A man beaten so severely his skull fractured in multiple places. Not a scratch on either of the people who claimed to have been fighting for survival. And then there was the testimony of the neighbor, the conversations Molly had reportedly had, the quiet, accumulating pattern of a woman building a paper trail, consulting lawyers, hiding recording devices, not the behavior of a victim living in fear, the prosecution argued, but the behavior of someone planning ahead. The prosecution also pointed out that Jason had been homesick, and had planned to move back to Ireland so that his son could start high school there, a plan he had mentioned to his sister Tracy more than 12 months before he was killed. If Jason was moving back to Ireland, the children were going with him, and Molly Martens would be left behind. The jury deliberated, and they came back with a verdict. In August 2017, Molly Martens Corbett and her father Tom Martens were convicted of second-degree murder and voluntary manslaughter. They were sentenced to 20 and 25 years respectively. Justice, it seemed, had been served. The family in Ireland wept with relief. The children, still trying to recover from everything they had been through, had at least been given that. But this story was not over. Underscore 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 underscore. Not even close. In January 2019, Lawyers for Molly and Tom Martens brought their case before the North Carolina Court of Appeals, arguing that their clients had not received a fair trial, that the trial judge had excluded critical evidence. The specific piece of evidence at the center of the appeal was the original statements made by Jack and Sarah, the statements where, as young children, they had described witnessing their father being abusive toward Molly. Those statements had been excluded from the 2017 trial because the children had later recanted them. The defense argued those statements should have been allowed, and that excluding them had been a fundamental error. The lawyers for the defense were ready to argue that, when the children recanted, they had been coerced, brainwashed, Tom Martens said, by family members in Ireland, who wanted to protect the narrative that Jason was a good man. So now it had come to this, the statements of two traumatized children being weaponized from both directions. One side saying the children were coached to lie by Molly, the other side saying the children were coached to recant by the Corbett family. Two families, two entirely opposite narratives, and two kids stuck in the middle of it all. On January the 31st, 2019, the attorneys presented their case to the Court of Appeals, and won. The judges ruled that the children's original statements shouldn't have been thrown out, and that Jason had been the aggressor in the altercation that left him dead. The murder convictions were overturned. Molly Martens and Tom Martens walked out of prison in early 2021 after serving approximately 3.5 years. Jason's family was devastated. His sister Tracy, who had fought so hard and for so long, was inconsolable. A retrial was ordered. The case was moved to Forsyth County due to the overwhelming media attention. A strict gag order was put in place, and for 2 more years, Jason's family waited. Then, in October 2023, came the twist that nobody had wanted to see. In a surprise move, Molly Corbett and Thomas Martens accepted a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter. The district attorney dropped the murder charges. Under the plea deal, both entered guilty pleas to manslaughter charges. The prosecution and defense agreed on a narrative of what happened in the early hours of August 2, 2015. Under the deal, Tom Martens admitted hitting Jason Corbett on the head with a metal baseball bat. His daughter Molly admitted striking him on the head or shoulder with a concrete landscaping brick. The plea agreement also stated that the autopsy and circumstances of the scene established that at least some of the fatal blows inflicted were of a nature, number, and level of force that exceeded what could have been reasonably necessary in furtherance of perfect self-defense. In other words, they were admitting what they did went beyond self-defense. They went further than they had to. Jason Corbett died because of that. A sentencing hearing lasting 8 full days followed. It became its own separate ordeal. On one side, the defense called a domestic violence expert, who said the severity of the beating was a measure of the fear Molly had been living in. That statement drew gasps from the Corbett family, seated in the front row. On the other side, Jason's children, now 17 and 19 years old, stood up and spoke, and what they said was shattering. Jack Corbett, 19 years old, told the court he had been abused by Molly Martens in every way. He said she had taught him to lie and manipulate people. He said his words as a child had been weaponized to help Molly and her father escape punishment for killing his father. He claimed the entire Martens family had been complicit.
Sarah Corbett, just 17 years old, told the court that Molly Martens had taught me to shoplift, vomit, and be a liar. She spoke of how Molly would hit her brother and punish the children with starvation. She said that after their father's death, Molly removed her wedding ring within days and told his children to get over it. She said Molly had thrown a framed photo of her birth mother down the stairs, screaming that the woman was dead. She said that when she was just 5 years old, Molly had told her that her father had killed her mother. Read that again, 5 years old. And this woman allegedly told a 5-year-old child that her father had murdered her mother. Sarah also told the court that after Tracy Corbett Lynch had won custody and brought the children back to Ireland, Molly had attempted to have a plane fly a banner over Sarah's new school. She had also contacted a girl who sat next to Sarah in class. The courtroom was weeping. When sentencing came, Judge David Hall placed Molly on suicide watch after she broke down crying in court during the children's statements. Molly addressed the court and said the events of August 2, 2015, weigh on her every day. She maintained her actions were in self-defense. I did the best I could, as a human, as a daughter, she said. Thomas Martens told the court he realized his actions that night were excessive and in violation of the law. He said he had repeatedly begged his son-in-law to let go of his daughter. But when Jason started to drag her down the hallway toward the bathroom, his instincts to protect her took over. Then Judge Hall handed down his sentence. He noted an enormous disparity between the state of Jason Corbett's body and the condition of Molly Martens and her father after the incident. These folks truly came away almost without a scratch on their body. which I find hard to reconcile," he said. The judge sentenced them to a minimum of approximately 4 years. Because they had already spent 3.5 years in prison from their previous conviction, they would serve approximately 7 more months. 7 months. For the death of Jason Corbett, the family in Ireland was broken. "I am at a loss for words," one family member wrote online. No justice for Jason. Molly was released from the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. Tom Martens was released from the Caldwell Correctional Center. Both were subject to 1 year of post-release supervision by a probation and parole officer. In June 2025, records from the North Carolina Department of Corrections confirmed that their 1-year parole period had been officially terminated. Their parole status was changed to inactive. They can now move freely within the United States. Jason Corbett's killers are free. And the question that has haunted this case from the very beginning, the question that to trials, to appeals, countless hearings, a Netflix documentary, a book, and years of anguish have never definitively answered remains. Was this a panicked act of self-defense that went too far? Or was it something that had been building for years, something planned, something cold? Consider what we know. A woman who started consulting custody lawyers 2 years into her marriage. A woman who placed hidden recording devices around her own home. A woman who, after her husband's death, told his children within days to get over it and removed her wedding ring. A woman who tried to fly a banner over the school of the grieving stepdaughter she had once claimed to love. Consider the father. A former FBI agent, a man who said, just 2 months before the killing, that he hated his son-in-law. A man who was staying in the house on the night it happened. Consider the body. 12 or more blows to the head, overlapping wounds. A piece of skull falling onto an autopsy table. And on the 2 people who said they had been fighting for their survival, not a broken bracelet. Not a torn stocking. And then consider the children. Jack and Sarah Corbett, who lost their mother before they could walk and their father to violence before they finished grade school. Who were coached, by someone, for someone's purposes, to say things that weren't true. Who spent years in therapy trying to rebuild lives that someone else had dismantled. Who stood up in a courtroom as teenagers and spoke truths that broke every person in that room. Jack, now 20 years old, said of Molly Martens, "I don't hate her. I just don't want to give her any power over me anymore." And of his father, he said, "My dad was my hero. He was someone I looked up to. He was my best friend." That is the truth that has always been at the center of this case. Not the legal arguments, not the appeals court rulings, not the sentencing guidelines. The truth is a boy who lost his hero, a girl who lost her father. 2 children who deserved a childhood and instead got a courtroom. Jason Corbett was 39 years old when he died. He had survived the death of his first wife. He had raised 2 babies alone. He had crossed an ocean for love. He had paid for a house and a car and a wedding and a life. And he had believed, the way that hopeful people believe, that love was enough. That if you tried hard enough, you could build something that would last. He had plans to go home to Ireland. He wanted his son to go to high school there. He wanted to open a pizza restaurant at Spanish Point on the Clare coast. Small dreams. Real dreams. The kind of dreams a man allows himself when he thinks the worst is behind him. The worst was not behind him. And so we are left, as we always are with cases like this, with questions that the law couldn't fully answer. With a verdict that felt, to an entire nation, like something less than justice. With 2 children who are now adults, still carrying wounds that no sentence can heal. With a family in Limerick, Ireland, that still wakes up every morning in a world that doesn't have Jason in it. A deadly American marriage. That's what they call it. But what it really was, when you strip away the courtrooms and the documentaries and the appeals and the headlines, was simpler and more terrible than all of that. It was a man who trusted the wrong people with everything he had. And it cost him everything.